Hi, I'm Katrina McLaren, and this is my podcast, The Last Resort. In this series, I'll be talking about our journey and the restoration of Casa Nova House, a stately heritage-listed mansion built in 1861, located in the small town of Oamaru in the South Island of New Zealand. This is a story of how we changed our entire lives, trusted our gut, and took a leap of faith to live our dream. Well, thanks for tuning into the Last Resort podcast. This episode is titled April Fool's Day. So we arrived back in Pukekohe and we actually had our wedding anniversary on the 4th of April. So it wasn't until we were sitting out for dinner in quite a lovely restaurant and we were talking about Casa Nova and everything that was revolving around it that we realised that we actually viewed Casa Nova House on April Fool's Day. So we weren't too sure if that was a very ominous beginning or the start of something that was actually quite exceptional. I'm going to go with the more exceptional option. When we were in Oamaru on the 1st of April and we did do that first inspection, we had also made appointments with the local Waitaki District Council to meet with the various heads of departments so that we could actually discuss what we were thinking and what our objectives were and how we could get it back into a business again and how to make that viable. And at that point in time, we were really looking at it predominantly as being a restaurant downstairs and our private accommodation upstairs. We did float the idea of maybe a couple of rooms for a luxury B&B if we needed to supplement our income. So we were very fortunate that actually on that day we were able to meet with the building consent team to discuss potential renovations and what that would look like. We were also able to meet with the planning team, and that enabled us to discuss the existing resource consent that was over Casa Nova House. So it was already resource consented to be a restaurant, but there were some quite sort of limitations around the trading days and things to do with, you couldn't trade on a Monday unless it was a private function, and you couldn't trade after 5 p.m. on a Sunday unless it was a private function. So there was, or a function of some description. So there were some onerous things in there that were probably very outdated under today's terms of how you would trade a business versus 20, 25 years ago. So we met with council. We also met with environmental health. And we talked about the requirements around relicensing the commercial kitchen. Of course, we've already been through that process before because we had a restaurant in Pukekohe called Poco Loco. So that had a commercial kitchen in it. And we'd also set up a food truck, the little crazy tapas truck. And that truck also had a commercial kitchen in it as well on wheels that was an extension of the Poco Loco license. So we were familiar with dealing with food control plans and getting a licensed kitchen and what the requirements were around floorings and all that sort of stuff. So, and we also met while we were with council with alcohol liquor licensing, and we discussed, our plans for the restaurant and what we wanted that to look like. We also discussed, at that point, we also had another little sideline called the grazing box, where we did sort of gourmet cheese boxes. So we wanted to discuss the possibility of an off license for wine for that. So we went through a multitude of things in one day with council over 4 different departments. And some people have told me that's quite unusual, but actually we found the council, especially the local council here, we actually found them fabulous. I was a bit of a novice on some of these things, especially around the resource consent and building. I found them very helpful and they were very patient and enabled me to ask probably at the time 1,000,001 questions. So I actually went back through my diaries and I had taken some quite good notes then. So it was very interesting to go back in time and see, how some of these things ended up playing out. For example, we didn't foresee a problem on any of it, and especially not liquor licensing. But that did turn around later and actually sort of bit us in the butt a bit and actually cost us 6 months where we couldn't trade. That's going to be a story for a podcast a bit later on down the road. We're back in Auckland now. We're celebrating our wedding anniversary. We've realised we viewed Casa Nova on April Fool's Day. And then we made an appointment to see the bank. And we had been dealing with someone at the bank for quite some time who was very familiar with us as business owners, knew our track record and our history with our business. The days of having those sorts of rapport with people are unfortunately to a large extent gone. But it was great to deal at the time with someone that knew us and knew our business and knew how that existed in the community and that it was supported in the community. and, that we weren't some sort of fly-by-night operator or just looking for a top-up loan or a remortgage to buy a boat or a European trip. We were looking at a legitimate site and a business that we were hoping to make profitable. We met with the bank, really long story short, on the 5th of April. So we'd only been back, days. We'd now signed a contract for Casa Nova House. That went off via the agent, obviously, to the vendor. And by the 11th of April, that was accepted. So what that actually meant at the time was that we were now the second contract. So there was a current contract on Casa Nova House, and that had been in place, I think, since around February 2019. From what I understood later on, it was, a lovely couple from Christchurch who really loved the property, and I think their intention was to actually use it as a home rather than it to be a business enterprise. They had obviously loved it as much as we did. There was a part of me that felt a little bit bad about that to begin with, but I'm sure that they would have followed some of the renovations as well with interest. So being the second contract also meant that then evoked the cash out escape clause in the current purchaser's contract. So they had, I believe at the time, it might have been 5 or 10 days, of which they either had to declare the contract unconditional or they had to let it go, and our contract would stand as the first. So we were absolutely on tenterhooks for that period of time, waiting to find out if we had secured Casa Nova House. It still seems incredible to me to think that this all took place within a period of 2.5 weeks. This is all transpiring. And at this point in time, we'd come back from a cycling holiday. So we then were sort of starting to tell friends and family, well, you know what? We might be moving to the other end of the country. People were quite shocked by this to begin with. I think it hit some of our closer friends quite out of left field. I think our friends knew at the time that we were looking at other sort of residential rural property around the area we lived in, but I don't think anyone had thought for one second that we would pack up our lives and disappear to the other end of the country following a cycle holiday. As we were sort of working towards finding out what was happening, we were starting to, have further meetings with the bank. I'd expressed to the banking manager at the time that I was a little bit concerned that, I was aware that the current purchasers had the contract over the property for some months, and obviously they were just as determined to want to buy Casa Nova as we were. So I floated the idea then about bridging and what that would look like and what we would need to do to make that happen if we were put in that situation. One of the criteria around the bridging finance was that we obviously needed to list for sale our house in Pukekohe rather quickly. By the end of April, had listed our home and it was on the market. Another part of the criteria around bridging finance was that, we had to get the house sold within 6 months. So there was a lot of deadlines sort of ticking away that we were thinking about. And at the time I thought, oh, no problem, Pukekohe, it'll sell like a hotcake. And I was wrong on that one too, actually, ironically. I think there's a pattern that's starting to form here. We then found out that the current purchasers could not go unconditional. So in effect, Casa Nova House was ours. So we were ecstatic. Obviously, we needed to sell our house to make that all happen. We'd started that process and we were underway. So we were really excited. It was the start of what we were, thinking was the next chapter of our lives, the next journey business-wise. So it was really exciting to tackle something new from the point of view of, well, here's a building that we're actually going to own our businesses in, what that was going to look like. And we were excited to move to Oamaru. It was a great town. We'd sort of found our local cafe, and we were sort of thinking, we were really excited about it. We weren't daunted about it. The only thing that we might have been a bit daunted about was just making sure that the house sold and that we could fulfill the contract. We probably had, I think it was a total of 2 weeks of bliss, where we thought Casa Nova was ours and that it was all going to be wonderful, and that there was rainbows and, unicorns. It turns out that obviously the original purchasers were very keen on Casa Nova House as well, and I absolutely can't blame them for that. And they countered, and the vendor accepted. So we were then pushed into our cash out clause of where we had 10 days of which to either, go unconditional, declare the contract unconditional, or we had to walk away. In that period of time, I was dealing with the bank and trying to push through that bridging aspect. So we knew that that was, it was a pretty tense time. We didn't know if the bank was going to approve that. So we were really nervous about it. Could we achieve all the time frames? And, anyone would tell you, I think, when you're meeting with the bank and you're talking reasonable sums of money and you're looking at interest rates and you're looking at all this thing and the debt and you're thinking, we've got to make this work. There's just no question of it. But I think, and I think Brenda would agree as well, we were determined that we were going to have this property. And maybe to a certain degree, I might have had some, I should have had maybe a couple more blinkers on. We were just adamant. That was it. Already we'd mentally moved in our heads. I think we'd moved. So it was just not if we're going to make this happen, it was when. How are we going to achieve it? So the house was on the market. The bank then came through and approved the bridging finance. As a part of that, I'd actually sent a letter to the agent for the vendor. I wanted to make very clear going into this. I had a few things that I wanted to make sure that the vendor was very aware of, that we wanted to make sure was working and operational, etc. So we wanted to make sure that things that had been expressed to us that were working were actually working. It's important to note, when we inspected Casa Nova House, we'd come back through with a builder. We had a rough idea of what we thought it was going to look like. So we were told that things were in working order. So you expect that to be in working order. But being the little Virgo that I am, I had put everything in writing, and around about the 21st of May, I'd put it in writing to say, this is what we'd be looking for at an inspection. We just want to make sure that the vendor's aware of that and that is all good. And our intention was to basically go unconditional the following sort of couple of days. The vendor came back and yes, everything was fine. We were all on the same page. Well, we all thought we were on the same page and we thought, great, this is really exciting. Come the 24th of May, the contract went unconditional and we paid the deposit. We had booked an inspection for the 10th of July. So we were really excited now at this point. We were nervous, but we were really excited. And of course, we had to find a manager for the restaurant in Pukekohe. So we did find someone to manage the business. That did not turn out to be maybe the best move financially on our behalf. One thing about being so far away, it's very hard to keep tabs on your business, especially after when also, COVID 6 months or 7 months later is about to hit. One thing that I would say, as being, we've had several restaurants now and I've worked for many different people, is that I would never do that again. I would never continue to own a business that was so far away from us without us being able to keep more tabs on it, or have someone with enough business acumen that we could trust that could keep an eye on it for us. That was an expensive lesson and we would never repeat that one again. So that didn't actually work out the way that we hoped. But in the very beginning, like anything, you go into a situation with the absolute best intentions. So we were, at this point, we were just really excited. The house was on the market. We were now unconditional. Casa Nova House was ours. We had to pack up the house really quickly and think about, what was going down the line, what stuff we needed to get rid of. So there was so much happening in the space of these several weeks. So after we were unconditional, I want to say around the 24th of May, we were definitely unconditional. We left Pukekohe around the 7th or 7th maybe of July. We were packed up, lock, stock and barrel. Containers had come in. We ended up needing 2 containers to come to the South Island with all of our, Brenda would call it crap, but all of our lovely stuff, including my fantastic artwork, which she hates. So all of this stuff was getting all packed up. And of course, the house had to be made presentable and look great for people coming in to purchase. So some things were left behind that then went off to family members, and other things were sort of contained up and ready to come. So the plan was that settlement was supposed to take place on the 12th of July. We're now making our way down from the South Island. We've got the car loaded up. We've got Coco in the car with us, our beloved miniature dachshund. Claudia the cat had stayed up in Pukekohe and my brother was in the house keeping an eye on it for us, so that was great. So we didn't have to worry that the house was actually just sitting sort of empty. In the back of the car we basically had a suitcase. For some reason the microwave, I'm unsure why, but we had the microwave, the skybox, a suitcase, and we were sort of all, geared up, ready to go. So we start making our way down the North Island. We drove down, obviously. We were going on the desert road, and I got a call from the agent. And when I saw the number come up, I thought, "Oh my God, I hope there's no problem," because we're supposed to be inspecting on the 10th of July. And I got a call, and it was to do with, of all things, gas bottles. I don't know why, but it absolutely raised a red flag for me, and it started to make me feel a little bit nervous about the whole process. So the vendor had apparently said that they were not going to put any gas bottles in at the property at their expense. I was umming and ahhing with the agent and saying, well, they have to, because we have to make sure that things are working. We couldn't test any of that prior because there were no bottles there. So we couldn't test the hot water. We couldn't test the califons. We couldn't test anything. And we couldn't, more importantly, test the boiler because it was an LPG gas boiler. And in the car, I'm sort of looking to Brenda, and I think I might have hung up and actually said I'll phone the agent back. And I said to Brenda, for the sake of a gas bottle, we're just going to have to say that we'll cover that cost, but it has to be there so we can inspect. So I phoned the agent back and said, look, just arrange the bottle. They can arrange it to be there for inspection, and we'll cover that cost. I wanted to continue with the flow of excitement that both Brenda and I had about this. At that point, we were very aware that we were starting a journey for us, and it was our next chapter of our lives. We just celebrated our first wedding anniversary. We'd been together for several years, but that was actually our first wedding anniversary. And it was exciting to go and do something which felt more like a project that was ours together. And that's absolutely what Casa Nova House was for both of us. So we continued on our drive. In the back of my mind, it had that little bit of a red flag, that just seems a little bit odd, because I wouldn't, maybe it's just me personally, but I wouldn't have split hairs over a gas bottle, but that's just me. And I thought, okay, no, don't worry about it, it's fine. So we continued our drive. We got to Wellington. I think we went and had a nice pizza and took Coco for a walk while we were waiting to cross on the ferry. And the ferry was actually a little bit late getting across, and I think we ended up not getting on board till 1 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, we'd booked a cabin. I'm not even sure that I slept on that, how we weren't seasick. It was so rough crossing across. We were happy all to be on dry land again and in Picton. And by the time we got to Kaikoura, I think we were absolutely shattered. We actually just could not drive any further. So we actually just got a hotel for about 4 or 5 hours, slept, and then continued on. So the plan at that point was to go to our friend Lynn's in Orari, which is exactly an hour and a half north of Oamaru. So the plan was to camp there, go do the inspection on the 10th, and then settlement is the 12th of July. That was the plan. So we get to Orari. We're excited, we're tired, but we're all really excited. And then we make our way to Oamaru for the inspection. And, it was really interesting because, as I'd said, I'd sent that email previously to say these are exactly the items that we will be looking for. And I'd kind of touched base with the agent too, and I was a bit concerned that maybe the vendor hadn't got there with a week or so up their sleeves to maybe remedy any issues that might arise. Once again, I put that down to the fact that, me being a Virgo, everyone thinks the same way as maybe I do. Like to be very organised about things. And, the one saving grace, I think, too, is that I was very good at always putting things in writing. And I would really recommend that to anyone. And a couple of things that I didn't put in writing, especially to do with the bank a little bit later on, did come back and bite me. When we went into this, I sort of made it very clear to the bank that what we were thinking our refurbishment figure was. That was expressed to me at the time that wasn't an issue, that wouldn't be a problem. And then later on, it did turn out to be an issue. There's a couple of occasions where I've thought, oh, I should have put that in writing. So I kicked myself by not doing that on some things. Luckily for us, I had put exactly in writing what we would be looking for and what I knew legally we were entitled to make sure was existing and was in good working order. So we arrived for the inspection on the Wednesday. We're really excited. We've driven all the way down here. It seemed to us like a dream was becoming a reality for us. So we went into this with really good intentions, and we're so excited to be there. I just remember it. And looking forward to the settlement, on the Friday. The one thing we were surprised about was that we were so close to settlement, and yet there didn't appear to be any tradesmen or anything anywhere doing any repairs or anything to the stuff that we had highlighted previously in our email. The vendor, we'd asked that there was a lot of green waste rubbish, and we'd asked that be removed. The vendor was removing that. So we were chatting, we got on very well. We'd agreed to buy a couple of pieces of furniture that was outside the scope of our agreement. And we were still at this point feeling very optimistic and didn't think that we had a problem. There was a couple of red flags thinking about, well, why is no one where are the trades? Where's the gas fitters? Where is everyone? So we agreed at that point that we would come back the next day, the Thursday, the day before settlement, and re-inspect to make sure that those things had been done. So we went off in good faith and we came back the next day. And this time, Brenda and I had talked about it overnight and we thought, no. We are going to check everything. We're not just going to take this at face value. So we did. We checked every PowerPoint, we turned on every light switch, and we checked everything. But the scary part is that it became very clear very quickly that the key items were not working. And that was things like the boiler, the calefont, there was no hot water. We couldn't test the boiler. And in a house of this size, it's 570 square meters. The most effective form of heating in a house of this size is the radiant heat coming from radiators. So we knew that needed to be working. And honestly, in our budgeting, because we were told it did work, we'd never factored that in because we knew that could be, anywhere 30 to 50,000. We were really pleased that at least we didn't have to worry about that. So we were concerned that we couldn't test it on the Thursday. Of course, we're now asking these tough questions. We need to see this working. We can't settle without this. And then that was creating friction with the vendor. Long story short, it was clear that we needed to leave. And then ironically, we got I can't remember if it was a call. I think it was a phone call from the agent saying that the vendor had said we weren't allowed to step foot back on the property. And I'm thinking, really? You have our deposit funds and we weren't being rude or unreasonable. We were just asking questions which we were completely legally entitled to do. We're very concerned that we're not going to make settlement the next day. I'm also aware that we've got 2 containers coming from Crown Relocations from Auckland that are supposed to be being delivered on the date of settlement. And not that we were rude or anything like that. We're not those sort of people. But we were asking questions, was this working? Show me how it works. And of course, it couldn't be shown how it worked. At this point, we were figuring out really quickly that the boiler wasn't working. The calefont wasn't working, so there was no hot water. To me, it appeared that the shower actually leaked and was unusable. And you could actually see that through a panel through the existing kitchen, the way that it was set up, you could actually sort of see that. Several of the doors we couldn't get in and out of still, and we couldn't, some of the lights, the lighting wasn't working. So basically it's like anything. When you buy a property, there are certain conditions that you sort of have to fulfill as a vendor. And this is the vendor's warranties and undertakings. It's very standard in any sort of sales and purchase contract. So there was nothing there that we were being, I don't believe anyway, unreasonable about. We just wanted to make sure that all these things were working. And we'd sent it in that email too, saying that, all the interior lights needed to be working. We wanted to make sure that, there was water running on an overflow outside the building from the toilet that was running down the wall when we saw it. We wanted to make sure the alarm system and the smoke alarm system was in working order. But the big thing for us was probably the boiler, obviously, and the hot water. That was kind of critical, that we'd be able to move in. And remembering too that we are in winter, it's cold. This then kicked off a series of events that I don't think anyone could have foreseen or expected. We ended up, it became very clear, and both Brenda and I were very nervous. At this point as well, you've got to also remember the vendor has our deposit. We are unconditional. We've paid a large sum of money and we don't have access to that anymore. So all we're trying to do is make sure that the terms of the contract are adhered to. Long story short, it meant that we could not settle on the 12th of July as planned. We had an issue whereby the vendor would not agree to put a certain amount into a solicitor's trust account. In a normal process, if there's anything that comes up in inspection, both parties by agreement will agree that a certain amount gets put into a trust account. It sits there in the solicitor's trust account. Neither party can touch it, and they've got to be in agreement on how, that it can be spent and released and whatever. Because at the end of the day, that would be the vendor's money. So it's not like it's something that we have, access to, that we can just do something with willy-nilly. Unbelievably, we couldn't believe it, but we couldn't settle because the vendor would not agree to put what was required within a trust account to make sure to warranty that these issues were going to be covered and were working. So we ended up in the most shocking of situations where we actually ended up homeless in Oamaru. We couldn't settle. Our containers were coming that Friday, and we were sort of stuck. So there was frantic phone calls going on between solicitors, as you can imagine. And it turned out, after speaking to our solicitor, that our only recourse, because this is so unusual for this type of situation to happen, where a vendor refuses to settle, that the only recourse we would have would be to go to some sort of high court situation. And we're like, what? This whole thing is just absolutely ludicrous and so incredibly stressful. We were already under pressure, we were bridging with the finance. We were aware of that, and now we were basically homeless. And, to add insult to the injury, the vendor has our deposit, and we're then told that we're not allowed on the property. So apparently we're not allowed to go back and inspect things on the property. I'm like, oh my God. So not only have they got our money, we're not allowed onto something that we're theoretically under contract for and have paid a full deposit for, and then we're homeless. So, we've got the dog, we've got the microwave, and we've got the skybox. I think the agent at the time just felt so incredibly sorry for us because we didn't know anyone in Oamaru. We had no contacts. There was, it was a bit of a catastrophe. And she happened to mention that her I think it was her yoga teacher, had like an Airbnb. And so thank God she sort of mentioned that to us. She was very much the vendor's agent, but she was kind enough to see that we were probably placed in quite a terrible situation. I think everyone was in a terrible situation, to be honest. We spoke to this lady and she very kindly let us go and stay in her house. We didn't even know how long we were going to be there for. At this point, we thought it was just going to be a couple of days and, everything would be sorted out, not a problem. We also had the dog with us. So, not everyone wants to have a little dog in their house. Things do happen for a reason. I'm unsure what the reasoning behind this whole scenario was, as we didn't expect to be in a situation of being homeless. And that's actually what ended up happening. The 2 container loads full of belongings continued on their way to Dunedin and actually went into storage. So Crown was fantastic about that. They just put it into storage for us. So that was one problem we didn't have to worry about. We had already arranged, like, a new Californian bed had been delivered already to Casa Nova House. So I was gutted. Not only did they have our deposit, they had our brand new bed, and we actually didn't know if we were going to ever see either. This then started a chain of events with so much unnecessary, I believe, but having no choice. I think the only people that benefited through this process really were the solicitors. The toing and froing over various things that went back and forth, all I kept thinking was, oh my God, this is just going to, for the sake of what we're disputing, it's going to end up costing us both more. It was costing us in time, obviously, as well, and we were having to pay for, rent for a property that we shouldn't have been having to pay for. As this process started to unfold, and I can't even begin to tell you, there's probably hundreds of emails that were going back and forth, not just between the 2 solicitors for either party, but also between ourselves and our solicitor, because we were just, we felt very isolated, very stranded, and absolutely unsure what to do. But all we could do was to sort of go through this process and hope that there was an end in sight. I think it was also quite awful for our families back in Pukekohe, because here we are, we'd gone off with the best intentions and sort of got in the car and, headed cross country as such, and sounds also very romantic and everything, excited about this next chapter. And then we're phoning them the next thing, in tears. We can't settle, they won't settle, and we're in effect homeless. It was just crazy, absolutely crazy. From this point, it was every single day I would wake up, very little sleep, and it would be constant emails back and forth with our solicitor trying to work out what we could do. The one thing that I am very particular about, and that is, I did not, I would fight something to the end. If you know anything about my personality, if I believe that I'm right, 100%, I am not going to back down. If I'm wrong, I'm the first person that'll fall on their sword and say, look, I'm wrong, apologize, what can we do? But in this particular scenario, I knew we were 100% right. And we actually, I believe, had the law in our favour, but it just wasn't quick. I was not going to back down on things. I'm not unreasonable, but I wasn't going to back down. If you were warranting that these things were working, then they need to be working. And it really was that simple, because we were also very aware of what we had before us. I mean, it's one thing to buy a property like this and understand that you're going to have a major renovation and that you know that you're going to be up for replacing windows and weatherboards and things like that. And as it turned out, there were a few surprises in the renovation. And you should allow for that. There should always be in the back of your mind a bit of a contingency plan that it's not going to go exactly the way that you think it will. But we did expect those basic items to be functional and to be working, because also we needed to live in the house. We were very aware that this was not going to be a situation. We didn't have a money tree. This wasn't a situation where we could live somewhere else while all the renovations were taking place. We needed to sort of be living in the property and being able to live in the property. At this point, Brenda also had got a job. So the plan was that Brenda would go and work. I wouldn't let her work as a chef because I didn't want her to cook her food anywhere else. So we talked about it, and Brenda actually went and worked for Idea Services, and which helps with sort of care in the community. And she's really good at that. She's got a great personality and very caring person. She actually ended up starting work while we were semi-homeless. And the plan was that she would do that. I would start at Casa Nova on the painting and start that ball rolling on the ground and project manage it and get everything lined up as far as all the trades, the architect plans for what we needed to do and all those types of things. One of us couldn't not be working. We had to we had to get an income coming in. We have the restaurant in Pukekohe, but that just needed to tick along and do its thing. As long as it was covering its costs, we weren't at this point. You can see how we started to get very distracted and not focus on what was happening with that restaurant, because it just started to become so overwhelming as to what was happening in Oamaru. So for a period of, I want to say at least 2 weeks, this went on. Settlement was supposed to be the 12th of July. Long story short, we didn't settle to the 24th of July. So on the 24th of July, we finally settled the property. An amount was agreed upon by everyone to be in retention, and it was agreed upon what was to be addressed from those funds in retention, but it took all that time to get there. And as I said, we were not backing down, and I'm pleased to this day that we went through those couple of weeks of absolute hell, because I think I would have always regretted it. It was bad enough that our journey to start Casa Nova had in some ways started with that little bit of a sour touch to it, but I was not going to let that determine how we were going to tackle this property going forward. And I kept thinking, maybe that was the whole thing with the whole April Fool's Day. So I thought I sort of wrote that whole thing off to being that well, that's maybe where that's kind of bit us in the butt a bit. It's just a bit karmic there with us having viewed it on April Fool's Day. We finally settled on the 24th of July. We got into the house. It was a little bit bittersweet, obviously, but we were just so pleased to finally get into it. And we camped out in one room of the house to begin with literally the bed on the floor. Thank God we'd packed that microwave in the back of the car, because at this point our stuff had gone into storage into Dunedin, so we couldn't get it on the day of settlement. It had to come a couple of days later. So, there was a little bit of rushing around. We had to go and buy a cheap fridge from the warehouse, so we had a fridge. Not ironically, the house was actually quite cold. We probably didn't need one. So we were camping out, I suppose is the best way to put it. Poor Coco, I think, must have thought she died and gone to hell because it was so cold. And she was used to a little bit warmer climate with Auckland. And then our Airbnb that we were staying in South Hill in Oamaru was really quite lovely. It was really charming. Then coming to the cold big house, she must have thought, oh my God, what's going on? We were then moved in as such. And that starts the journey of, our gear arriving. So the two containers do finally arrive. And, once we were in the house, we realised quite quickly, well, We've kind of got no hot water, so that needed to be remedied pretty quickly. There was no heating, that needed to be remedied pretty quickly. So the heating was definitely a big problem for us because the house was incredibly cold. I think having been closed up for so long, the first sort of week that we were in the house, we went and hired dehumidifiers, and we started running them downstairs. We actually, once all our gear started arriving and we were unpacking everything, we realised pretty quickly that the couch didn't actually fit through the lounge room doors. So we were very fortunate that we had removalists that actually were able to jump on top of a truck and put it through the outside window on the first story. That couch will not leave that room. We've laughed about it, saying to Brenda that if we ever leave or sell or anything, that couch has to stay in there, otherwise it's going to be chainsawed and back out the window again. We were starting to see the brighter side of things. We were looking at colour schemes, and we were starting to think about what the future was going to hold and how we were going to achieve everything. A Rosine's shop, that they became our new best friends as I was camping out there a lot of the time and starting to look at colour schemes and what we could do. I don't know if you remember from the first episode, the first thing that Brenda wanted done was to get rid of that orange wall colour, which I believe was called Moroccan Spice. Truly horrific. So we started to look at that, and we decided that we would be the first thing that I would paint and get that orange spice out of there. So while we're going through this time, of course, we finally moved in. We then need to start arranging all the trades to do all the repairs were required under the agreed upon retention fund. So this started a whole other can of worms that we would never have foreseen in a million years. And I'm going to tell you all about that on our next episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Last Resort podcast. This episode was April Fool's Day with your host, Katrina McLaren. To see Casa Nova House, go to our website, www.casanovahouse.co.nz, or check us out on Facebook or Instagram. You've been listening to the Last Resort podcast with Katrina McLaren.